Before diving into the personal and organizational challenges that the City of Toronto presents, I want to talk a little bit about your time in the City of Hamilton. In duration and significance, a really remarkable tenure. After hearing the list that I talked about in the intro, was there an initiative or a moment during your time at the City of Hamilton that stood out to you, and if so, why?
Actually, the thing that stands out the most for me is the work that we did on our corporate culture. To have the privilege of overseeing over 7,000 employees, and to be able to work with them to develop a culture that helps people come to work on Monday mornings and gives them some expectation that they're going to work for an employer that cares about them. That to me actually is probably the thing that matters the most. Sure, we're involved in lots of projects and involved in lots of programs that benefit the community, but I think the principal job of a city manager is to make sure that everyone that works for the organization has a common focus and feels that their employer cares about them.
We'll return to that subject in the context of your current role at the City of Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
But on the subject of a cultural focus, let me first ask you, turning back to this at the City of Hamilton, was it an initiative or an idea that you brought to the table, or was it something that was brought to you to attempt to implement?
I would say there was a few of us that, working with Helen Tomasic and HR, we've seen how other organizations have, succeeded and failed, and the common denominator is culture. And so I think it was a few of us that felt that it would be important to engage our organization and ask them the basic question: what kind of organization do they want to work for? So I would say there's a few of us that thought it was a good idea, and we just implemented it.
One of the challenges that we have, any leader has in delving into and dealing with the issue of culture is that it typically presents as something that's internal to an organization.
Yeah.
But in reality, it is a very decisive consideration how the organization interacts with those around it outside of it, and in your case, with the city administration, the public at large. Would you agree with that proposition?
It's absolutely true. I mean, the success of your organization really hinges on not just your leadership and management, but also how your front line sees their role and the importance of it. So, yeah.
We'll return to that as we talk about the City of Toronto. Now, you spent the bulk of your career in Hamilton before going to the City of Toronto. You still reside here. You'll appreciate the refrain spoken of in the past from time to time that the City of Hamilton has never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Many feel that that's changed. Do you feel that that sentiment is no longer the case, that it's changing? Are you optimistic about the future of the City of Hamilton, and if so, why?
Hamilton is a great community. It just fundamentally is, and despite what may have happened in the past, Hamilton has enjoyed a tremendous success. Think of Hamilton in the Canadian context. Don't think of it just in the last 50 years. Think about what it's contributed to the building of the country. I mean, whether it be steel or innovations in terms of technology and other things. So it has a very deep DNA that has been successful for a long time. All communities ebb and flow, and certainly Hamilton experienced the typical problems that steel belt cities experience all across the globe. But it was really a matter of, I think, time that the market would shine its light on Hamilton again. And optimistic for the future, I would say very clearly, not just because of just what Hamilton is, but the context of Hamilton and the Southern Ontario economy. And I know we're going to talk about regional thinking, but Hamilton is part of a very large economic ecosystem that has to be cared for, and if it's done right and properly, the future of people living in Hamilton or Toronto or Durham or wherever you want to talk about will be very positive, but it will require us to stop thinking in terms of municipal silos and thinking in terms of the regional economy that we're all contributing to.
When we look ahead to the future, certainly in this region, and leaving aside for a second how it is that this regional economy is impacted by the provincial and national economy, are there any specific risks that you think in this region might derail the success that Hamilton is experiencing?
Really, some of the real basics here, and they're threefold. It is about transit, it is about housing, and it is about healthcare. So those are three things that if you choose to do as independent agents, you run the risk of not just creating really inefficient outcomes. I mean, you run the risk of really failing and negatively affecting the quality of life of people in this region. So those are three massive things. The other thing I got to tell you, if there's one thing that keeps me up at night, it is the future of this economy will hinge on critical investments, but most importantly, skilled trades to deliver on those investments, and i.e. the infrastructure investment that City of Toronto is making alone. Our 10-year capital program is worth $41 billion. I'd say that number is probably low. The kind of money that we have to spend in order to kind of keep not just state of good repair moving in the right direction, but critical infrastructure investments is significant. We'll get into that in a few minutes, but having the people to do the work, and I mean, thankfully we have great immigration laws and everything else, but I mean, it's fast becoming, as people are aging and moving out of the workforce, I don't know if we have enough people coming in to fill in the jobs, because those jobs are growing.
That is it's a vexing problem in part. Like so many complicated social problems, the solution to it usually involves a wide array of different actors acting collaboratively, and that's a challenge.
Yep.
And here
right.
Also, we're both parents of young people. The challenge of dealing with young high school students who have to try to figure out what it is that they want to do if they're not interested in pursuing a typical university background, and understanding and exploring where it is and why it might be that you would pursue a skilled trade, where the money is good and there is significant need, remains a challenge not only for you as a municipal leader, but private companies, parents, high schools. If there's a path forward in terms of solving for that issue, do you see it? What advice would you give us all in terms of working towards that goal?
So I completely agree. There is an outcome that needs to be achieved, but the only way that you're going to achieve it is through major institutions working together. And it's not kumbaya. It's really the critical factors of success. The first time I actually was in front of the Monk School every year invites the city manager of Toronto to come and speak, and I spoke about intergenerational equity. So when you talk about our kids that are in their late teens, early 20s, and I think about being part of the baby boomer generation and some of the decision making that we've made, we haven't really left a fantastic legacy for those that are coming, and I really hope that we take responsibility for the future we've created as baby boomers, and you're probably not the same age as me, but maybe close. But the bottom line is that we're handing on significant debt to that next generation. Their jobs aren't like ours. A lot of them are on contracts. They don't have the kinds of pensions that some of us have and the benefits that some of us have. The middle class is shrinking. I know that to be true in Toronto. So all the vectors that you would want pointing in a particular direction aren't pointing in the right direction. I think we've created a legacy for the next generations that is going to be incredibly trying for them. If ever there's a moment in time that people need to work together, I would say it's probably now.
Would you agree with me? And it's something that I've wrestled with and believe that the concept of mentorship, although typically discussed as it relates to young people, students, young professionals, frankly is an influence and something that no matter what age you are, no matter what role you have, CEO otherwise, is always something to have in your life. Do you believe in mentorship, not only in you mentoring young people, but in you looking to others to continue to mentor you in your path?
Oh, absolutely. That's the term lifelong learner. That's us. That's what we do. And and I'm sure, Lou, you with your boys, and then I know with Hannah and Ben, if you see something you're interested in, and someone happens to be a leader in that, call them. We're much more approachable than people think. We will go out for coffee. We will give you whatever, 15, 30 minutes, whatever it is, because. And it's almost like people are afraid to do that. And you're going, I'd say we're more apt to want to, we're probably more taken by the people that have the courage to do that than, and then not everything requires a formal program. It's like street hockey. Don't put any rules on that, people. Let us go play. And that's what we do. We go play. And I would say, to those people that have a passion for whatever it happens it is, go find out who's doing it and go talk to them.
And you'll, I'm sure, agree with me that on those occasions in which we've been asked about that, folks generally, including ourselves, like to talk about what we do and what we've done as well.
Yeah, and then we love to see success in others.
Yes.
That's why people, I don't know what it is, but as you look at where society is and where it's going, its complications and all that's going on right now with government and everything else, there's still a fundamental optimism and there's a curiosity amongst us, and that's why we probably talk to each other. That's probably why we enjoy problem solving. That's you get the right group of people together, and there's possibility, and usually good things happen.
It does also raise an interesting organizational and corporate issue in question, and what you've just said leads me there, and that is that we tend to talk about innovation as being something that involves technology or tools, when in reality the most vexing problems that we have, the solutions for them, the innovation usually centers on people, their passions, their relationships with each other, their networks, how they communicate and listen. But it seems to be in an era of social media that it's precisely that constellation of aptitudes that we're now less and less able to do. Mm. Would you agree? And how has that impacted your leadership of the organization that we'll touch on in a second, the City of Toronto, the distance that technology can create in an environment that is so large and disaggregated where personal relationships are decisive? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Certainly social media, it's almost, I need a disclaimer on any of the job applications for anyone that wants to be a senior leader in a municipality. It's like, be careful what you're, asking for. And it's, I think, democracy is an incredibly important thing, and the ability for people to say what they need to say is incredibly important. So, I look at the Jason Thorns of the world here that is that has a Twitter account and is communicating the things about the city of Hamilton and what's happening around the world, and I'm sure he gets a fair bit of criticism whenever and you really have to have kind of tough skin, and I think but at the end of the day, you're right. The answer moving forward is the ability for us to, to talk, to work together, and to, put in perspective the criticism that is going to come regardless. So, but if that causes you to stop because you're going to be criticized, then, you're in the wrong business. I have an eye and ear for what people are saying, but at the end of the day, the complex problems are still there. We still have to solve them. So,
with courage.
Yeah, and the right, attitude. Innovation, I think we're going to get to this, and I just find, innovation isn't something that is just, over there in a box and we can go get it and then, and apply it and we're done. It's a mindset, I think. And so, people who like to problem solve, I think, and like to build relationships with people. Innovation is just a normal part of what they do. So when we put it in a title, and say, tag, you're the innovation person. It's, it's like handing breathing off to someone. I'm tired of breathing. You breathe for me. I'm going, no, I kind of have to breathe.
Well, let's talk about that and many other things within the context of the City of Toronto, your current role. And let's set the stage a little bit for the magnitude of that challenge and run through some biographical information about the city. First of all, in a very rough way, what would be the GDP of the City of Toronto broadly?
Well, metropolitan Toronto, which is slightly bigger than Toronto when they measure GDP, is the GDP is just about equivalent to Alberta and just about equivalent to Quebec. So over 20% of the economy of Ontario is coming from the Toronto metropolitan census area. So it is it's a fifth largest government, to give you an idea. So it's and so its economic importance has been significant for a long time.
In terms of the size of the city workforce that you lead, how big is that?
37,000.
And how many departments would silo those 37,000 employees?
44.
Do I take it then that you would have a manager for each of those 37 departments?
Well, yeah, for the 44 departments, I have certainly a leader. So the titles will vary, but and the way that Toronto is set up is we have what we call service areas, and so and I have a deputy city manager that oversees the service areas. So the model's a little different than what you have typically in most municipalities. The DCMs that I have are overseeing service areas. So a service area may have a dozen, divisions, if you will. Their job is really to make sure we have the right people leading those divisions. Their job is also to keep an eye on the performance of those divisions. Also to make sure that where integration ought to be occurring within the service area or across service areas it's occurring. And then fourthly, to make sure when we're transforming the organization in a particular direction, that they, together with myself, have a strategy for transformation and that the players in these divisions are on board and that we are able to make the changes that we have to. So they're not, I don't want them to, as I said to the mayor when I started, if someone at committee asked me what color is the park bench at the corner of Bloor and Yonge, I said, if I answer that question correctly, please fire me, because I am clearly not doing my job. There are certain things that I should not know because others must know them. And so it's really important to me that each layer in the organization, their job description and their performance is clear. So I work on the organization as opposed to in it.
It occurs to me that being a transplant into the City of Toronto, given its size and magnitude, that assimilating the institutional knowledge that would be required, even to be able to identify the changes that you want to make, let alone to lead effectively, would be daunting. How did you approach that problem?
So I'm so grateful I had 10 years in this role in Hamilton. So I have to understand that even though Toronto workforce may be bigger, its budgets may be bigger, the services it delivers are pretty much the same as Hamilton. So I had 10 years of learning the role here in Hamilton. So my level of anxiety is a little bit different. And so I look for things. Toronto and Hamilton are similar, certainly, because they both amalgamated around the same time. So I look to see how amalgamation has resulted, and so I look for administratively, are the structures, are they amalgamated the way in which, like a financial system, is there am I dealing with one financial system or multiple financial systems? And strangely enough, I think Toronto has made a lot of progress on the amalgamation front, but there still seems to be a bit of a legacy of it there. Whereas I would say Hamilton, you'll get people coming to the podium talking about the pre-amalgamation days, but as an administration and really as a council, they are very, very much one city. Toronto's one city, but I would say administratively it's still kind of dealing with amalgamation.
Your city manager's office bio says that you are, quote, by profession a registered city planner, by previous experience a transportation and housing director, by necessity a relationship builder, and by passion a public sector employee, end quote. And it's a particularly personal and engaging bio. Which one of the labels would you say is most important to you in your current role?
Well, I go nowhere without relationships. So, the complexities of society can never be solved by, institutions acting independently. So, and I don't mean just public institutions, the private sector, not-for-profits. I mean, it's just the reality of what we're facing, whether it be, crime or a shrinking middle class or, the effects of global warming. All these things will never be solved by individuals, going alone. So relationships, and when I say relationships, I mean, I had the good fortune of working on some complicated stuff here in Hamilton, and the Red Hill it was no small matter. This is where you and I met each other, and working with the Haudenosaunee taught me a million things, I got to tell you. And there's one thing though in particular that...
Sorry, but for the benefit of those who are watching, this is an Indigenous community.
Yes, there's sometimes referred to as Six Nations, but they talked about relationships, and what was made very clear to me was relationships are really built on three things, and in this particular order: respect, trust, and maybe friendship. And the respect is typically not that difficult to kind of earn amongst people who are at tables trying to solve problems. Trust is a longer term commitment, and as we all know, you can earn it and lose it in seconds. And then friendship, and this is the thing you often hear people talk, oh, we're good friends, and it's like, no, friendship has a certain patina, has a certain depth that comes in time. And I think oftentimes, we just kind of use that word. But I would say that in the Haudenosaunee would have taught me differently. So that thing about relationships, that when you're at the table, respect is there, but trust that we're going to do what we say we're going to do. And the other thing I'll just say quickly is that my mindset is I'm an interest-based negotiator. I'm not a positional bargainer. I find, positional bargaining typically takes longer, is a lot more adversarial, and I think at the end of the day destroys relationships. Interest-based bargaining is where obviously that I'm clear on what it is what is of value and importance to you, and that I understand that, and that you understand the same thing from where I'm coming from, and that we kind of work on each other's problems. And then we find those answers that often lies in the middle. So you're not always hitting home runs. As much as I know people love the Babe Ruths of the world, I was more of a Joe DiMaggio guy. Give me let me get to the plate and hit singles and doubles. That's all I ever wanted. So that to me, that mindset in relationship building, and I tell you, with when we were dealing with the civil disobedience, with the people that we were negotiating with, it was evident day one, and we talked about it, that we were interest-based people, and that is why we got 8 agreements done in less than 6 months, which I think have stood the test of time. So it's good stuff.
There's an enormous amount to unpack in that answer that would itself occupy a number of podcasts. But let me pull a couple of strands out of that, Chris. First of all, the subject of relationship and trust. When you make the comment about the world's or region's most intractable problems requiring collaboration, not only intra-institutionally, but inter-institutionally. You've magnified the complexity of the problem from a trust perspective, because you're dealing with the dynamic of many different people across organizations. In terms of how it is that you facilitate the creation of trust in dealing with your colleagues internally and externally, how do you approach that? Is it something that you do mindfully? Is it just because of the way you are, it comes easily? How do you view and then incent, propagate trust as an organizational imperative?
So it probably helps that I'm the youngest of 5 guys. Just to survive in that kind of family environment, and I say to people all the time, nature of my job is it's like I play in two-way traffic all day long. And I'm not crossing at the crosswalks. I'm in the mid-block, so I'm having to kind of look both ways all the time.
It reminds me of that video game Frogger back in the day. Remember that?
Oh, it totally is. Yeah. And so understand that's the world you're in. And so like I say, I think very early on, with 4 older brothers, you had to, kind of figure out how it is that you're going to, navigate that. I think what we actually in Hamilton have a lot of experience of working together. We created Hamilton Anchor Institute Leadership Table, which was all the major institutions, and we met 4 times a year. It was only the CEOs or the heads of the organization. So this was the LINs, this was the universities, the college, the hospitals, the community foundation, the chamber, ourselves, the poverty. So we would meet 4 times a year. We all agreed we would not have any letterhead because that's just more bureaucracy, didn't want that. But we had a common focus. And there was a very particular outcome that we were trying to achieve. So relationships for the sake of relationships are nice, but having a common focus, in our case, it was housing in hubs. And we said that if in a term of council, if we didn't do something material, break ground or get something really going as a result of all of us pulling in the same direction, then we'd stop meeting because we're all nice people, we're all busy, but we just can't seem to get our respective bureaucracies aligned and getting some things done. And that I think, that kind of ups the game a bit when it is, it becomes a pass or fail. It's like you either got it done or you didn't. And so I think that really helps in when you're trying to create these tables, these relationships, and knowing what win looks like and what loss looks like, and you own it collectively, and you don't want to let each other down. And I think that was a learning that I certainly had here in Hamilton, and we're applying that in Toronto. I mean, we're doing it within the organization, you say, inter and intra. And so we're striking those relationships with major institutions. And it's not that we didn't talk. I mean, of course, before I came to Toronto, there was always conversations going on. Some pretty phenomenal work being done. But I think now we're realize even more with certainly some of the pressures that are being put on us, and rightfully. I'm not disagreeing with the province wanting to kind of look at its fiscal situation, how it is that maybe we can deliver our services more effectively. And so it is, I think, in some respects, it's helping. It's kind of maybe forcing us to kind of get in a room and start talking maybe a bit differently and achieving some common outcomes. So that's kind of what's happening right now.
When you look at this from the perspective of problems that require solution, and at a higher level, this question of problem solving, you would have to appreciate as a leader in an organization that failure is inevitable.
Yeah.
And arguably perhaps the most instructive process if approached in the appropriate way. How do you approach the certainty of failure organizationally as a leader? How do you look to extract lessons and to benefit from failure from the perspective of growing and developing organizationally?
Boy, you would love a great answer for this. I'm just telling you, I think too often and almost all the time the debrief never happens, and I think the mistakes get repeated. I mean, that's just to be honest. I think, and you're absolutely right. I think failure is inevitable, but we tend to be very incremental for a bunch of reasons. So
when you say we, you mean?
We, as in whether it's a group within City Hall or it's City Hall working with others.
Actually, I thought you were talking about lawyers and law firms for a second.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So I mean, we like to have our early wins, and sometimes those early wins don't quite materialize the way that you would hope. But that's how. I mean, we don't. there's many good ways to avoid catastrophic failures, and that is, by setting out a course of action that begins with, small steps. And honestly, when you're working with people from across an organization or organizations working together, you kind of want to build the rapport with each other, have a few early wins. But as I say, I think, I find that we don't spend enough time, learning the way we should together, especially when we're working together. And because, it often feels, and I don't know what the law firm world is like, but, too often we find ourselves kind of living another day. It's like, okay, today's Thursday. Okay, I think I can make it to Friday and maybe to next Monday. And it's like, and oftentimes, people don't have that long-term view. They don't even know how to celebrate their little wins. I mean, they just kind of move on to the next thing, and they don't really see the progress that they might be achieving. And they don't see the value of failure. And this is what kills organizations, is they become so risk adverse that even small failures cause them all to kind of, run for the woods. And, and for us, I mean, we're rolling out some stuff right now. We've got people helping us on change management, and our communications people are quite good. But, we're still making some mistakes, along the way in terms of some of the simple things that we're implementing. And, but I think my approach with people is like, hey, I'm from New Brunswick. I'm far from perfect. So, I'm kind of, give me the benefit of the doubt here, in that if we didn't get it right, we'll get it right. And, and so I think sometimes maybe just, how much of your ego gets in the way is part of the, the problem. So
when you say that, it occurs to me, and I'm not sure if anybody's written this book, but the East Coast temperament is a business philosophy. You'd look at East Coasters like yourself as people who are resilient, humble. We're pretty much aware of the reality of the difficulty of life and the setbacks that it can deliver to you, and then getting on with it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you probably bring that as a necessary ingredient or a group of aptitudes to your current role.
You think of all the great music in the world and the great literature, and look back on the great writers and look at their environment, their upbringing. It's always, think of the number of great musicians from Ireland and some of the great writers from Ireland, and
not generally a cheery crowd, my friend.
No, but they drink, so that probably helps. But it's that may be part of the common denominator. You're right. I mean, it's like life is not always easy in these places, and be careful with too much success. Maybe you just get lazy, and you just take for granted that that momentum is always going to be there. And and I think coming back to Hamilton, to your point about how Hamilton has maybe in the past has done things that didn't result in the success it wanted. I mean, it's like it's learned from it,
Well, at least that's the aspiration. But I mean, I think there's a great analog in nature, right? You don't create muscle unless you're ripping and tearing down muscle. Growth comes from that destruction. Creation is an act of destruction. I guess you're speaking to that.
Yeah. I think that's the perfect way to say it. And you're right. No one runs a marathon without sweating, and it's going to happen.
So let's talk a little bit about innovation and the fostering of it, the creation of a culture of innovation. You touched on it earlier today, and you've identified the fact that it's really almost today a cliche and a box-checking exercise. It's certainly also something that's increasingly challenging the legal profession. But you have an approach to it that speaks to issues, I think, like culture and relationship. How have you and the city approached the fostering of innovation institutionally and culturally? What has worked or is working?
So, I would say, what I mentioned earlier about HAIL, creating an Anchor Institute table where, very specific outcomes were agreed to, and then, and allowing the parties to bring their skills to the table and achieve those outcomes. I mean, that's an environment that you create. You're deliberate about it. We're doing the exact same thing with City Lab. I mean, we have that wonderful space right beside City Hall, but we've brought the universities, the college, and the problems and opportunities of the city together, and and the alchemy there, basically, requires the administrations and the students to problem solve. So we're deliberate about that. You got to want to innovate, and I think. I think in essence, that's probably why I love planning, and that's why I love what I get to do. And that, the challenges of society, as much as, think about technology, think about the disruptors that have been happening, think about, the Ubers and the Lyfts, think about, our artificial intelligence, think about, the driverless vehicles, think about all these things that are presenting dynamics that, and it's not going to stop. I mean, and government's ability to kind of deal with it. It's almost like in the fight game. You've got certain boxers that are defensive boxers. And some of them have been incredibly successful. But in the fight game, you have to react to the punches thrown. But if you don't throw a punch yourself, you're not going to win. You will not be successful. So we have to be able to deal with the day-to-day challenges of the disruptors, but also, why aren't we innovating? Like, if government that you see today is exactly the same with only minor nuance changes in the next 20 years, I mean, I think we will have failed. And I think, just like the banking industry, just like the airline industry, I mean, look what I can do with a device right now. I can move all my money in strange ways if I want to in a nanosecond, and government. I mean, look at how adaptive we are. We have to fundamentally change, and it's not just about building relationships and achieving outcomes in the community. Just the way that people perceive us, and that generation that I talk about, the millennials, our kids. How irrelevant are we going to be if we continue to stay the way we are? Just the way in which they, gather information from us. I mean, it's not a question, change for the sake of change. No, it's relevance. And then you look at the heft of a government. I mean, again, we're the 5th largest government in the country. Our operating budget is $13.1 billion. Our capital is $41 billion. I mean, that's a significant amount of money. How effective we are in delivering those services and spending that money. I mean, this is why people, I think, have such disdain, I think, for government, and that they don't see us as being, driven by value for money. And I'm not a right-wing, left-wing guy. I'm not that at all. But my parents, who are 97 and 96, brought us up a certain way to they were poor. Everyone was poor. And so, the idea of getting the most for your resources, that was drilled into all of us as kids. So when I look at government, I kind of go, I get what people say sometimes about the way in which we act and operate. But I will say this as well. People have no idea how good we are. And I'm not saying that as a rah-rah, cheerleading, anything. I mean, I work with incredibly talented, skillful people, and sometimes I feel my job is just to kind of release them, and to give them permission to innovate, to be not just the best, but just to kind of see the future 5, 10, 20 years out, and be able to start to, why aren't we taking advantage of AI? Now, in Toronto, we are, all over blockchain in a couple of different areas right now. So we are going to, mimic what you see happening in the private sector and then apply it to us. So, but that's a culture, that's an environment that you have to be deliberate about, and that's the future of government, I think.
Well, it does speak to the enormity of the challenge ahead. We've gotten to a point in terms of the development of our economies and civilizations in which the problems that remain are very intractable. Mm-hmm. Most of the easy problems have already been solved. And those intractable problems that remain, by definition, will require people across institutions working together in trust, mm-hmm. with a view to innovating or making positive change, with a tolerance for failure, with resilience, in an environment in which we have never had access to more knowledge with less wisdom, right? And so how do you account or solve or deploy or make all of that work? And what you're saying is that you, as the leader of the City of Toronto, you've identified all of those issues, the reality of the situation, and some of the things that you described are your way of attempting to solve for them.
Yeah.
And it's organic, it will take time, may not succeed, but I'm hearing you to say, very much dependent upon the good faith and goodwill of a variety of institutions and leaders and people to work together to do that, or it won't get done.
It won't get done. As I said, I mentioned in terms of what we did in Hamilton with the anchor institutes, we had an outcome we were trying to achieve. So how you frame the problem or opportunity is important. So when I think about, the days of municipalities acting as independent agents has got to come to a close at some point. What part of we're in a regional economy don't we realize?
But it's not just with, Chris, I would interrupt you to say that the reality of the point that you're making is I think it can be scaled even more. It's not just a regional economy. We are incredibly interconnected to a North American economy, to a global economy. And there's no getting around the fact that this isn't a silo.
And you're absolutely right. I think the success of the Southern Ontario economy, when you think about transfer payments that the federal and provincial government makes to keep this country moving in the right direction, it has to rely on those urban regions. It's in terms of being successful. So making critical investments in those urban regions, making sure that they work. Take transit. We have about 10 transit authorities in Southern Ontario. And I attended a meeting last week where we're talking about service and fare integration. To me, it's almost like if you took 10 people and said, look, you've got 5 minutes, we're going to go order pizza. You got to agree on all the toppings. Get 10 of us to agree on it won't happen. It's like we're going to, depends on, who's at the table. But what I'm saying? It's like getting 10 people to agree on service and fare integration. At some point you have to kind of look at it. And it's nothing. I'm not saying anything new. I mean, Ann Golden talked about this, decades ago. And parties have talked about, regional economies for a long time. But ours is maturing. Like ours is, we're about 6.5 million people, in the GTHA, and we're going to grow to over 9 million in 20 years. So 20 years is tomorrow. Some people, 20 years, I won't be here, I will be here. No, 20 years in terms of how cities and economies and governments, how they fund, 20 years is nothing. So where we are today and where we need to be in 20 years from now, it's like the Gretzky thing, where the puck is going. It's not where the puck is, it's where the play is going that you have to be thinking about. So, over 9 million people, and they're going to, are we going to be building a lot more roads? Doubt it. So making better use of that the capacity of the existing transportation system means transit's going to play a heavy role. People phrase it as, the war against the car. There's no war. It's not about a war. It's about how you allocate that capacity. And how you do that with 10 players is a real question. You need to kind of get the players to kind of, not just work together, but, have maybe a bit more of a singular focus in that service integration, fare integration you got to make travel easy for people. And then they got to be able to live within this region. Toronto's already experiencing some, significant problem in terms of affordable housing. I see housing as a regional thing. I see healthcare as a regional thing. So again, I think it's how you frame it that really matters. And then if you frame it properly, bring the parties together to kind of, see how it is the present system is operating and how it is it needs to operate in that kind of broader regional context.
When you say parties, and you talked about 10 people, and here we're talking about municipalities or governments, it would seem to me, given our prior conversation, that these problems aren't getting solved unless a significant constituency of influential private actors are are also part of that conversation. Insofar as those employers are the ones that need
Yeah.
knowledge workers, and they have to live someplace,
Yeah,
and it's their tax
exactly.
dollars that go to fund so
Exactly.
much of this. Have you had a challenge in incenting or involving private actors into these discussions? Has it not happened? If it hasn't happened, why? If you agree that it's necessary, how would you lead that kind of consultation?
So the Toronto Regional Board of Trade has talked about this. I mean, they represent the chambers of commerce across Southern Ontario. It's not that there isn't, a private sector, public sector group of people that don't see this problem as significant. And maybe I'll be a little bit critical of people in my profession. It's like, all the white papers in the world and all the reports in the world and all the pilots in the world, all these things that we do to generate evidence to say that we need to do X. I mean, we do that. It's the interface between, those reports and that evidence and making political decisions. I don't know if we think through that last yard before you hit the end zone. You know what I'm saying? It's like there's the the easy job is really, I think, the technical, administrative, pulling all the evidence together and saying, well, there you go. There's the answer. And then it's like, then we just kind of hand the report to the politicians and say, have at it. I mean, they're dealing with a whole variety of challenges that, include the economy and transportation in this case, but they're dealing with a whole set of circumstances and weighing it all the time. And I don't know if we spend enough time working with the decision makers, not just standing up at committee and firing off our comments to them at the podium, but working more closely with them on these very specific issues, helping and having maybe a little bit of patience, because not everything is going to be done tomorrow, and maybe they become election issues. Maybe we frame them in such a way that the next round of decisions we have to make about who leads these governments, that these topics are not just well researched, but they're made as critical elements of platforms. How do we do that?
When you look ahead to the end of your tenure, in however many years that is, what will seem a success to you in terms of your accomplishments as you see them now and when you look back on them upon being done?
It's the same thing in Hamilton. It's the effort that was put into the culture of the organization. So, that is it well led. I was told when I was offered this job, what I heard, what I was, what Mayor Tory mentioned to me was, once, you have to inspire the organization, you have to ensure there's succession planning, you have to make some tough decisions, and you have to, work with people to make sure that Toronto has, long-term financial sustainability. And so, I mean, those were the four things. And so, but what's the common denominator to all of that is a great civil service, leadership that is truly skilled. And leadership to me is not just about commitment, competence. It's about character, the type of leaders that lead an organization, innovation, risk tolerant, courageous.
Selflessness.
Yeah, absolutely, and more, in a genuine enjoyment of working on interesting work. Because that culture, if that culture moves, every organization has a culture, has actually many cultures, but if you collectively move that a couple of degrees in the right direction, it's faith in human nature. I mean, it's as much as we're so critical of ourselves. I just work with too many good people. But that will be, I think, the thing that will matter the most. It's not about a road that got built or a building that went up or whatever. But those, as corny as it sounds, and I know when I say it, I can, oh my God,
It doesn't sound corny at all.
But to some it probably does. But I don't know, my own little experience would tell you that, that matters. It just does.
Chris, thank you for your time today.
No problem. Enjoyed it, Lou.
Thanks for listening to the Accelerating Business Podcast, powered by Gowling WLG. If you'd like to be a guest or for more information, please visit gowlingwlg.com, Accelerate Podcast.